Emily's the president and the owner of Holy Cow Consulting, the company through which we've been working, along with a partnership with other folks. So before that, she was a staff attorney, a staff attorney for the Legal Aid Society in Columbus, Ohio. Emily's been with Holy Cow for almost 11 years, and using the data from the mainline congregations that take this assessment all over the country, is able not only to pick out patterns, and that's all we're looking for. We're not looking for criticism, critiques. We're looking for patterns and things that you might be able to concentrate on. That's patterns that are important for congregations just to be aware of. But also, effective ways that congregations can adapt to the needs of the people that you are wishing to serve. So is it with great joy that we welcome today Emily Swanson to talk to us about something that was certainly thematic in our worship service, and certainly is a concern and a question for a lot of us. So Emily Swanson, around hospitality.
Okay, good morning. So a couple things I'm going to be honest about. I have to look at my PowerPoint as well, so we're going to all twist a little bit. It'll be good. Thanks for having me here. My name is Emily Swanson. I live in Columbus, Ohio. I actually grew up in upstate New York in a church that looks so much like this. I feel right at home. It's really funny. It's great. Far west, though, far west. So I don't know if you all experience this, but I always have this issue with past Emily when I'm present Emily, and let me just share. About a few months ago, your presbytery folks approached me and said, would you come and do a talk about hospitality? And I looked on my calendar and I said, yes, that time is open. And as I was prepping for this, after the time we've just been through the last week, I thought, what a lot of hubris to come here and talk about caring for each other. Right? But as I sat through your worship this morning, I thought, okay, I'm in the right place, number one, for me. Number two, I also think about who we are as church. And if there's ever a time where we need to sit in spaces where we love each other, no matter what, it's now. This is the time to be church. And we have to do this exceptionally well because we're called to do it. So we're going to see if my clicker works, and it does. Look at us. Thank you. So when I think about anything we need to do, I want to root it in Scripture. And so we're called to do this well. Romans 12:13 says, when God's people are in need, be ready to help them, always be eager to practice hospitality. And who are God's people? Everyone, right? We don't get to pick and choose. They're everyone. So we want to make sure we're really thinking about that when we start talking about hospitality. So here's the thing. As church, we're not as good at this as we think we are. So I have never, and we work with hundreds of churches every year. I travel around, do strategic planning, look at the data with folks, sit with them. I have never had a church say to me, yeah, no, we try to not be friendly. It's goal one. And these are never the slogans on churches. No one else is welcome here? Sorry, we're done. We are full up. Too many people. We're done. And we did all the things. We did them all. And now we're finished. And in fact, sometimes when I work with highly vital churches who have really good data, really strong in satisfaction and energy, where are we headed together, they still might struggle with hospitalities, but they'll say to me, we don't want to make changes, right? Because things are going so well. And I say, Christ never said, and you can just sit on it now. You're all finished. Never once. And so we're always being pressed to grow, and that's really important. But the other thing I have to be honest with you, oh, that didn't work. There we go. Churches tell us constantly they want to grow, right? We are always hearing, how do we get new people? How do we get new people? But before we can talk about hospitality and have good conversations with it, we have to be honest with ourselves in who we are as church. We have to be really, really candid. And that means we have to start by really talking about these things. So if I walk into a Presbyterian church, and these are all true stories, so stick with me here. And they say to me, their number one priority is to grow with families and children with youth. And I'm in a space with them in their church, and I say, what do you do when a kid makes noise in worship? And they said, no, kids can't make noise in worship. And I say, okay, what do you do when they start to move a lot? They need to sit still. And I said, so what happens when a child doesn't do those things? Well, the parent needs to take them out. Will you offer anything to help them so they can be a part of worship and have someone else watch their kids? No, probably not. So I said, let's be candid, you don't want kids in worship, right? And that's hard for them to hear. They looked at me and then someone started laughing. They said, you're kind of right. Let's be honest, though. If you don't want it, don't pretend you do. So you either need to shift and be willing to change, or we need to have honest conversation about it. And how do we move out of that stuckness that we have as church? I also deal with churches that don't really want new people. What they want, though, is they want folks to come in because they're tired. And they want their money and their time. And I say to them, let me get this straight. You want young families to come in, give you their time and their money, and what do they get in return? And they don't have an answer for that. And to me, that slogan, come give us your time and money on the front door, is losing proposition all the way around, right? We've got to be really careful. And if you're feeling a little like, we're a little like this, just hold that and be honest about it. It's okay. You're not alone. We also don't always want to listen to younger people when they come in. And to me, younger people is anyone younger than me, myself included and younger. As I get older, I'm just going to do that. But one of the things I hear is there's a lot of tension sometimes when younger folks, so our millennials, our Gen Zs come in and they want to give feedback and they want to do those things. And folks say, we've always done it this way, or we tried that a long time ago. And that shuts down any kind of change, right? So we got to be careful about that. We also have to remember the world is sacred ground. Sometimes we walk outside of our church, and I'm going to talk about this more in a little bit, and we do all kinds of things, and folks know we're a part of this church, that church, whatever that is, and we forget we are called to act and be like Christ in all we do. There is a church that I worked with and did strategic planning, and when you walk in on the door, it says, this is sacred ground, and when you walk out, it says, this is sacred ground. So you remember, in or out of the building, out in the world, both is true. So we've got to have these conversations and say what we mean. And my clicker, there we go. So let's start. We're going to go through different parts of hospitality. I'm going to talk about what is hospitality, why hospitality, and then the how-tos. So I'm always kind of very pragmatic. You heard I was an attorney in my past life for legal aid, so I like steps. I think they're helpful. And that's just my nice way of saying I'm a type A person. So what do we mean when we say hospitality? What am I talking about when we're talking about it? So when we do our assessments, we look at hospitality in two ways. We look at externally. How are we caring for new folks or folks out in the community? And we look at it internally. How are we caring for each other? And I'll talk about both and what that balance looks like. But the questions we're looking at when we're kind of saying, how are we doing in these areas is, are we welcoming and enriched by persons from many different walks of life? And do we have a plan for members to personally welcome guests? And I mean a plan. Let's not assume that Sue, who knows everything about the church and the history and can tell you about the stained glass windows, is the most welcoming person. It might be. Sue might be amazing, and if there's a Sue here, you are. However, anyone else who might have that, we want to be really careful about really leaning into our gifts. There are introverts, there are extroverts, there are folks who are comfortable with this, folks who are not, but we need to have a plan. Because if we don't plan, we can't assume it will be done well. I can't imagine where else in life we do that. We're just going to hope this works out, right? We really need to be clear. So these are our external questions. Our internal questions are, has being a part of this church community given new meaning to my life? Do I sense a friendly atmosphere among members in our church? And in times of personal need, do I feel that genuine care and concern from people? So when the kind of that rubber hits the road, do I feel like we dig in deeper with each other and care? And that's the internal part. How are we feeling these things? So why do we need both? Don't panic. This is a business model. I promise. I'll make it work. So we have to have both because external hospitality or anything we do externally allows us to be adaptable and be mission focused. And we need the internal because that gives us involvement and consistency. It gives us agency. And so we need both to be healthy. If we are too far on the external, meaning we're focused too far, then we really run out of the ability to equip and be good internally, and so we overpromise on what we can deliver externally. If we're too internally focused in church, we are really meeting the needs of what we need, and we get stuck. And we also end up kind of at this point where we don't meet the things we need to do to move forward and do all the things we talk about in terms of outreach, in terms of mission, all of those things. We have to have this balance. Without it, we are out of kind of teeter-tottering, whatever that, we kind of want to stay in that center. And sometimes we focus a lot on the external and we find ourselves burnt out and tired. And sometimes we focus on the internal and we find ourselves kind of focusing on the things we shouldn't be. Like why did we move the flowers? Why is someone in my pew? What did we do with that closet? And you're laughing because you know you've had these conversations. So we've got to be careful with the balance. So when I'm talking about hospitality today, that's what we're talking about. Why do we need it? I know this seems obvious, but we need it because when we think about the why, we have to be able to answer this. And so this comes straight out of Simon Sinek's Golden Circle. Simon Sinek made a model, I think it was in 2014, that essentially said, I'm finding a lot of organizations that don't know why we do what we do the way we do it. So we have to start everything in church with your why. What is your purpose? What do you believe? And everything you do touches back to that. You ask the question with everything, what do we need to do exceptionally well to achieve our why? And so then we get into the how, specific actions that are taken to recognize, kind of get to that why, and the what. What do you do? What's the proof that we're really meeting what we want from our why? So everything has to be around our why. If we can't name the why of we do hospitality, which cannot be we are tired and need money. It just can't. It can't. That's not right. You know that, right? So we want to make sure we're thinking that's not what God is calling us to do. So we want to think about that why first. I had this really great opportunity last weekend to be in Denver with a Presbyterian church out there. I do work with other denominations, but lots of Presbyterian churches lately, which is good. I'm a cradle Presbyterian. Don't tell the others. But I got to hear this theologian in residence out in Denver, and her name is Nadia Bolz-Weber. Yeah. You might have heard of her. But I got to go to this education hour, and then she preached. And one of the things she brought up in the education hour was this piece of Matthew. And we all know it, 25:35, for I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty and you gave me a drink, I was a stranger and you invited me into your home. And one of the things she reminded me of, and I'm just going to tell you what I took away, is we talk a lot, and you see this on social media and all the memes, is be like Jesus, right? This isn't about being like Jesus. Who is Jesus in this statement? He is being served. This is about serving and caring for Jesus. He is the thirsty. He is the hungry. He is the one looking for community in the scripture. And that really, for me, was a good reminder and kind of flips it on its head a little bit. Because then it's not that I'm being like Jesus, I'm serving Jesus. And that changes the way I think. And it was really helpful to kind of recenter me because I get lost in memes too and all kinds of things like many of us do. But it's really nice to think about when I think about the scripture now and see Jesus in other people. We forget to say that enough, I think. So it was really important. So that is really our why in terms of hospitality. We are serving Jesus when we do it well. So the other thing I want to say, our other why is we move to action through a really clear path. We have to understand why we're doing things first. Understand it. If we stay there, though, if we stay in the thinking, then we tend to ruminate. I have a lot of intellectuals I work with, and they have the best checklists I've ever seen. And we stay in our head, and we really run the risk of over-intellectualism, and we get stuck. And we kind of say, did we cover all our bases? Did we do this? But so we've got to then move from the head, understanding the why, to the heart. Where are we called to do this? Where will we feel Christ in this? And we need to have those conversations, and then we move to the hands. If we skip those steps, we are missing something. So I have churches that have the best checklist and the best strategic plan, but it hasn't gone through the heart, and so they stand up here and they say, we've got a great plan. Look at all the lists of things we've made. Let's go do it. And then no one engages, or they engage very minimally, and folks say, what do we do wrong? I say, we have to feel it. We are moved by emotion. We are compelled to do by feeling. We are not compelled by a great idea. It is both. It has to flow. Think about anything that's moved you. It's gone from head to heart. It has to hands. So make sure we understand our why, but we're making it flow through where we're called to do it first, too. So the other reason we want to do hospitality well is really honestly about growth. And I'm really remiss about talking about growth. I feel like our mainstream denominational churches, which is who we work with, we really talk about count data a lot. The numbers and the budgets. How many people, how much money. And I think that's created this feeling of loss for us because all we measure then are those numbers. And that tells us, are we doing this well? And that's not the only thing. And that is a beautiful song. So it was really to segue into this. So be really careful when you start talking about numbers, because that's not indicative of a healthy church. I have worked with churches that just have 25 folks on their average weekly attendance, and they are far healthier and doing better work than a church with 1,000 people. So don't let it take you off path. I want to be real clear before I share this next thing. When we have high hospitality in our data, you grow and retain. So you retain folks and you grow by about 1% per year. Now, 1% is a lot if you think about even just having a few folks in your church. It is that extra person. So think about it that way. We want to make sure that as we're thinking about this, we understand that piece. If you have average, so meaning compared to 2,800 other churches in our database, if you just have average hospitality or lower, you will lose people at about 1% per year. What you also have to have, though, and this you can't see, is high trust in leadership, meaning we have built that internal system of trust and good conflict management. And that means we are able to have hard conversations in effective ways. So it's kind of not just hospitality on its face, but we have built that internal piece where we trust each other and we are moving through conflict well and supporting each other in tough conversations. COVID was a weird time for everybody. For us, it helped us really retool some things we wanted to think about. And I'll tell you what we learned about COVID. What people miss most, where people want to put their energy, and what needs the most attention. And I'm going to tell you right now, it's creating opportunities to form meaningful relationships without exception. When I ran a pilot in June of 2020, and I asked 90 churches, what do you miss more? This, or this, the thing they missed the most was each other. It was not the worship, it was not the programming, it was not the building, it was each other. And so we are headed now into a period of time where 79% of the folks in this Harvard study under the age, or in those ages of 18 to 24, are lonely. They're just lonely. And they're more lonely than our seniors. So if you're 66 or older, 41% feel lonely. And that doesn't mean that this is an either or. This is a yes and get used to saying that. It is a yes and. It is not, well, do we need to take off this and move over this way? No. If folks are feeling lonely across the spectrum, how do we create opportunities to form meaningful relationships together? We need to be mindful of that for every age and generation as we go. The other thing we know is that young folks are twice as likely to say they are feeling left out. So when they come to your church, they are looking for community, and it really does matter. The CDC has issued this whole thing around loneliness, anxiety, depression. It's been a big thing in the last 2 years. But we know that without friendships, there is a 67% increase in death by heart attack, by heart disease, 50% increase in death from cancer, unless you have daily interactions. There was a TED Talk about this that was really interesting. It was like, if I walk into a coffee shop every day and say hi and get my drink, and someone says hi to me, I am likely to live longer and have coffee, which is two really good things. So we want to remember all of these things kind of as we move through church, because church is a community that we are building. And what key recommendations have come out of all of these learnings over the last year and a half is we need to reimagine and reweave our social relationships in healthcare, schools, and many other institutions, which would include churches. I really was excited. I thought you ought to say church, but you didn't. That's all right. We'll do it again, which would include church. Thank you. That made my dream come true. Okay, so as we're thinking about this, what's really interesting is we're seeing in Gen Z is a reemergence of a desire to do things in person. And in fact, there was just a study that came out, 51% of Gen Zs who are in the workplace long to do things in person. And I said something like that in a presentation, and this sweet woman who was maybe 22 said, because college on COVID was terrible. And I was like, right, because they are longing for those interactions with each other. So these are our whys, all those pieces. It's about kind of where we're called to do it. It's about the fact that it helps us become a more vibrant community in Christ, and it's the fact that it's needed. So the how. So we need to do the work. How are we going to do it? I'm going to tell you, I used to have, everyone remembers DVDs, right? Come on, DVDs. I used to have this workout DVD, and on it, you know how you would watch one the way through and it'd be fine, and you'd be like, oh, this is cute and clever. And she would say, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And then by the fifth watching, I thought, please stop saying that. But it sticks with me because hospitality is about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. I hear a lot of things like, what if I should know them already? Or what if what if they've been a member for a long time and I've just missed them? Or what if I don't like people? Then we just need to get uncomfortable with here. And we need to go out of what our comfort zone is, because we're church. And that's what we're called to do. So we're going to start with externally. What do we need to do externally with the new folks coming in or out in the community to be and making sure it aligns and we have adaptability and mission? Remember, because we're on this teeter-totter. So I want to be clear about the formula here and put it in kind of brass tacks. Adaptation means that our church is willing to change because people are changing. This is not unprecedented. We have to stop saying this. People have always been changing. The church is not suddenly going through a new thing that we've never had a new thing before. That is crazy to say, and we can't say that, right? Because we know the world is ever changing, and the church started with 12. So look where we've come. And it's gone through ebbs and flows and reformations and all kinds of things. And so we need to be open to that. So adaptation is we need to be able to meet the needs of the people we are serving, know who they are, know what they need. We also need to have our mission clarity, which is reaching new people is a ministry. You will get nothing from them at the beginning. You need to go in thinking that way. It's not what can they give you, it's what can you give them that they can't get anywhere else. And if you don't have that answer, you have to figure that out. What can they get from you that they can't get anywhere else? So it needs to include these two things, and understanding that we will have to change because that's life. And we need to really think about our mission and that this is meeting needs of folks. So we've found out why people don't attend church. Now, the number one reason that people don't attend church is they don't believe or they've found other ways to meet spiritual needs. I am going to set this one aside for hospitality. Great hospitality is not going to fix that one right now. And folks will say, well, can we talk about that one later? Yes, someday I will have an answer for all of these. But the second really close reason is they're afraid of being judged or not accepted. And you talked about that a lot in worship today. What a beautiful worship service. And the third is they're afraid of getting it wrong. So let's talk about those. This whole hospitality thing, when I started talking about hospitality, it came to me in two ways. I was in a yoga class where a woman was talking about the services that were coming up for the Advent season and said, I'm just really frustrated because I'm not going to get a seat in my church. That was one. The second one was years ago when my son was 4. He's not 4 anymore. He was not a kid who could sit. Who has had one of these? Like, it was just... Yes, thank you, everyone. So we were in a diner, and he's flipping around, looking at this couple behind us. Henry, you need to sit down and focus. And I didn't say focus. I said, let's try to eat. And the couple behind me, the woman said, that kid reminds me of that kid from church yesterday, and how he wouldn't sit. And it was really frustrating, and it ruined worship for me. That starts there, hospitality. It starts when we know you're a part of church, and we forget that. And I didn't say, hey, I'm a church consultant. That was a really bad idea. I also didn't ask what church they were a part of. But you can see, if that's what folks hear, they're not going to want to come, right? And so we have to remember that. So take a minute, and we have to take this time and assess with an open heart and ask these questions. What do people see when we leave our building? On Sunday mornings, when you walk out of your building, if they see that you're all just hurrying off and you're not saying hi to people and you're not doing the things that really are about building a body of Christ, and they're walking by and you're not saying all those things, that's not hospitable. And it makes you not want to come in the building because you think, what happens in there, right? What do people see when we're working on our church grounds? When you're out and about kind of doing things, what do people see? Are you working together? Are you kind of also, again, being thoughtful about the space around you and how people see you? What do people experience when they see you do ministry? Is it we couldn't get enough people to volunteer, so it's just me and Barb over here? Is it we love being here with you, and this is where we get to do what we're called to do? What do they see when we do ministry? We can't be burnt out doing the work. We need to make sure we're engaged and engaging our gifts. What does our website say? You all talked about this, about who we are, and do it. If your website says you are open and affirming, you need to be. No ifs, ands, or buts. And there are churches that do that, and they are not. And that is not fair to people when they walk in. We also need to make sure if it says we're a welcoming place of Christ, we really are a welcoming place of Christ. That simple. Kind of really think about it. Where do we greet people when they walk into our building? Whether it's for special events that we're hosting in the building, whether it's worship. If the first time we're seeing folks is when they've meandered through an entire building, and we're not thinking about how to help them get where they need to go, then we needed to do that. I worked with a church in St. Louis who has really complicated parking. And I said, where do you greet folks? And it's like all the way around the building, and I said, we need someone out in the parking lot helping folks figure out where to go. How do we welcome people? And then this is my favorite one. What do your signs say around your building? I am in a lot of church buildings. The kitchens are always the biggest tell. But if you tell me a lot of things I can't do in your space, I feel really uncomfortable. Again, type A, but person. But also, if you're telling me, put this back exactly the way it was, that makes me nervous. I walked into an Episcopal church, so I'm going to pick on them, and there was a sign that said, in a really nice neighborhood, that said, our local police station number is this. And I said, what happens here? Like, why do we need that? And the sweet rector said, I've never noticed that before. I'm going to take it down. Things like that are really confusing. And your signs need to also say, we welcome children in worship if you do. Be that clear. Let them know. Don't leave people to guess. It's uncomfortable for them. We can be uncomfortable. We don't want to make them uncomfortable. We also, so then, that's kind of the acceptance and judgment part. Like, let's help us move through these things in effective ways. But let's talk about afraid of getting it wrong. So people during your service need to be clear. Now, you all don't, well, I grew up Presbyterian. There's not a lot of kneeling. But, if they're sitting or standing, make sure it's clear. How do we do things? If it's moving in and out of pews for communion or whatever, help folks navigate that. Passing of the peace. Please don't just go to your folks. Really do that clear, all the way around, welcoming folks and saying hello. And we want to make sure that folks understand that. Now, I know passing of the peace is a real tough one because folks are like, it goes on too long, it goes on too short, we don't have, whatever that is. So just know it's, again, going to be uncomfortable because you need to say hi to everyone, right? So we want to be careful about that. The thing that I find really compelling is when you walk into a church is having someone who is available to sit with new people if they would like it during worship and saying, Bob is in the back row. If this is your first time in worship and you need help kind of moving through things or you'd like to sit with someone, he's there to help. And then there's just someone there and they don't have to do it. Bob might sit alone. But that's okay. And Bob, if you're in here, it's okay. You'll get to sit with your family later. But then we have to seal everything in, right? We have to kind of, as adults, as we learn and go through experiences, we have to come back around and understand, why should I come back? And this is my Angelou quote, but I've learned that people will forget what you said and they'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. And so when I ask folks, what do you love about this church, your church? You could go to any other church. Why do you go to this one? They say, because it feels like home to me. That's the top reason. This feels like home to me. And that's what we want people to feel when they leave. Someone told in the readings this morning, we walked in and we left and we said, this is our church. That's what we want folks to feel. Even if they can't tell you all of the logistics of how the worship went or what they did, that's what they need to walk away with. And then this is my favorite, because we know we love our pews. We do, we love them. However, the whole church watched with nervous anticipation as the visitors sat where the Martins have sat for 42 years. I have not been to a church, no matter how welcome they are, where they don't have a story about someone who stood over someone and said, can you move down because I sit here? Or there are hymnals with people's names on them, or Bibles. What does that mean? Can you sit there? Does that be really thoughtful about this? And this is just logistics. It's not even anything meaningful, really, because you could move just a little bit down the pew and probably see just as well. And the cool thing about moving around the sanctuary is you hear things differently. You see different people and all those things. I know this is kind of tough stuff, this pew thing. And there's like all kinds of adaptive books about church that include this as a thing. However, it's real. And so just because it's included in a lot of things doesn't mean it's not real. So it's something we want to be thoughtful about. So that's external. How are we bringing folks in? How are we welcoming them? How are we out in the community? Let's talk about internal, which needs to include involvement and consistency. So I am talking a lot about what churches need to build in terms of capacity for internal health. I have 6 typically, but for hospitality, we're going to focus on 3. Also, my colleague was like, Emily, this is really dense. And I promise you're going to get all this information. So I cut some things out. So imagine how much longer we could have been together, right? So as we're building internal health in terms of hospitality, we want to make sure we're thinking about these things. How do we facilitate change? New people are change, by the way, no matter what. But how do we move through change together? And we've all had to do it. I got a really long story about changing to a green carpet 2 weeks ago when I was in Missouri with a church and how that was a big vote. The green carpet vote is what they call it. And that's change, but it's a carpet vote, right? But it's really, we had colors up and this is what we came up with. So how to fulfill our purpose in ways that resonate with change and changing environment. So be really thoughtful about this one. Sometimes we stick to things because we've always done them. And there are beautiful traditions we have in the Presbyterian Church. But sometimes we guard things just to guard them because we've always done them. So a hanging of the green service on a Wednesday at 3 where no one comes anymore, you're guarding that to guard. If you have a women's group that meets at 2 on a Wednesday, that's why you don't have young folks joining. And it's funny to watch when I do listening sessions and focus groups with churches and we have these conversations and the older women say, I didn't even know you wanted to be a part of it. And the younger women say, I never could. I never got asked. It was never about that. So really making sure we adapt well. We also need to lead and govern effectively. This is your session, your lay leaders, all of the folks who are kind of leading our ministries and outreach too. We are doing the right things, including changes that are necessary for the mission to be fulfilled. What is your why? What do we need to do exceptionally well to achieve it? That's a question we have to ask with everything. And then listen to each other so we're building intentional relationships. When we have lay leaders and we don't feel listened to, that's where a lot of that internal hospitality starts to break down. We start to feel like there's a leadership vacuum, decisions are being made, we don't know why. I also have never had a church say to me, we know too much of what the leaders are doing, we wish they would stop communicating. I always hear, I never knew what's going on, and then the leaders say, I don't know how many more ways we can tell folks. However, we need to make sure that we're listening on both parts, right? Leaders are listening, we're listening as church. And then we have to be able to resolve conflict. I'll tell you, we came out of COVID and a lot of the consulting I was doing was on really tough conversations that churches had during that period that they could not move through. We cannot wait till things blow up to have tough conversations. We need to always be building our conflict management skills as church. It's actually biblical. Proverbs 27:17 talks about it being a part of sharpening our wits in a way that is helpful. And it's a part of being human. And conflict can be growth-driven. It can be a way we come through something and say, I've learned more from you, you've learned more from me, now we're going to move forward and make some good decisions. But if it's divisive, then we've lost something there and we need to back up. So all of this has to be done exceptionally well in order to do hospitality well. Why? Because if you walk into a church, you can feel really quickly if we're not feeling the love of Christ together. And before you invite folks in to feel the love of Christ, we need to be feeling it with each other first. So these things are essential as a build up. They're foundational, that internal piece of that hospitality. The other thing, when we're talking about building meaningful relationships, they have to have 3 parts. As we think about congregations, we are meant to be something very unique in our communities. We are not just a social club, right? So we need to build meaningful relationships socially. That can look like all kinds of things. Trivia night, bowling, all of those things that we love to plan. Potlucks, we're good at potlucks, right? Thinking about those things. But it has to include also spiritually. When we are an overly intellectual church, God bless us all, that's fine, it's good, but we forget that we need to be creating vulnerable spaces to share our walk with Christ with each other. And that really is the thing that drives building deeper relationships with each other. So as we're thinking about how do we build deeper relationships, we need to be doing it spiritually. That could look like a prayer walk. That could look like every beginning of every session meeting on the agenda for the first 15 minutes, we are talking about where have I experienced God in my life? Or where am I struggling with God in my life? We need to be making time for those things in our lives too. And then it also needs to be in our ministry and outreach. So not to create whole new ministries and outreach, but how do we connect with each other while we're doing good works alongside of each other? For example, one church that I'm doing strategic planning with, one thing they came up with is every 4th Sunday they make sandwiches together for folks who need that in their community. And so they decided they would partner with someone each 4th Sunday actually, every time they do it. How about that? And they partner with them. And then as they're going through the doing together, there's a question that they can ask each other. And it might be on what happened in the service. It might be kind of what's happening with you. It can be all kinds of things. But that's digging deeper with each other and building intentional, meaningful relationships while we do alongside of each other. But we need all 3. One without the other two will not do it. So we've got to make sure we're digging deeper there. When we're thinking about our programming as a whole, and are we digging deeper with each other and creating these, we really need to think about these things. Is it still something we need? Does it align with our purpose? I know people hate it when I say this, but sometimes it's good to let things go, to say we did it for this period of time. It was a beautiful ministry. Now we're going to pray for it, celebrate what we did, and move away from it. It's not a failure to let things go. It means you're adapting, and that's okay. I'm not saying let everything go. I want it for the record. Someone always comes up to me after I say that, are you saying we should? No. But what I'm saying is assess what we're doing. Oftentimes I have churches that used to have 500 people in average weekly attendance, and now they have 100, and they're still doing all the things they were doing before. It is not a failure to let things go. We also want to make sure, does this work in a way that includes new people? So if you tell me you have a dinner social club that's been meeting for 25 years, I'm going to say to you, how do new people become a part of that? And we want to be really thoughtful about that. How are we doing things that include people? And there's a big difference between this kind of all call while we say we need 5 people to do this thing, as opposed to, I've seen this gift in you. Would you be willing to come with me and do this together? That's a whole different thing. We want to be thoughtful about that. Are we building relationships where we feel safe to be vulnerable with each other? Are we? Because that's what church should be. It should be where we can come here and we're giving each other space to share where we are in our lives, and we're digging deeper with each other in that way. And then, why did we stop doing certain things? This is kind of, when I ask folks to think creatively in listening sessions, they'll say, we used to do this thing. And they'll tell me about it, and I'll say, why'd you stop doing it? I say, I don't know. Why did we stop? You have to know that. You've got to find out, because before we reset and kind of come up with different ways to care for each other, do hospitality, we need to figure out what did we need to learn from it. So if it's that Joy was running this whole program and no one would step up and do it after she left, that means it's a person-centered ministry. And that can't survive without having mentorship and other folks who will step up and lead it. So we want to be careful about that. So when we are thinking about doing anything internally and continuing it, these are the questions we need to be asking. The I do it, you do it syndrome. I was doing strategic planning with a church, and finally this woman said to me, they were talking about, gosh, how do we need to adapt for all the young, they have a lot of young families, how do we need to adapt? And this woman said, I'm 67 years old. I get up and come to church. They need to get up and come to church. And then she said, oh, that wasn't very Christ-like, was it? But you know what? It was honest. And it's how we all have felt at one point or another. It's just truth. I do it, you do it, right? But it doesn't take into account a lot of things. And one of the things I'm seeing in churches is we talk a lot about sports for young families. We talk a lot about, gosh, they can't get here, but we get stuck there. And so I encourage you to move out of this syndrome, I do it, so you do it, and really think about things like this. I have a church right now who has a list of all of their kids and what sports and other extracurricular things they are in. So on a Sunday, 2 people will agree to go to that. Not their kid, not in their family, but in their church family. That gets you out of the stuckness of the I do it, you do it, right? So thinking creatively is really important. The other thing I've done a lot with our data recently is looked at it generationally. I took over 11,000 responses and broke them down by generation. This is what younger people need. And younger, anyone my age or younger is what I mean. So that's some Gen X's, honestly, and some millennials and Gen Z, but mostly millennials and Gen Z at this point. They need to be seen and loved for who they are. They need to feel that and make it be genuine. They need to feel personally connected with the congregation so that they know when they walk in, these are my people, this feels like home. Everyone needs this, right? This isn't unique in this way. They need to feel an informal welcome that's genuine and authentic. And that means that we are not immediately asking them to sign up for a committee. You know that happens. They're like, oh, you're here. Do you want to do this thing on Sunday? They want a group that values mental health. This is a big one, and honest conversations. They want to have folks that will sit around and not say, well, you need to get over it. We need to listen and really talk about mental health things and really ways we can move through it. It is actually healthy and good, and we're learning all the benefits of these types of conversations. And a congregation that has a place in the world that is meaningful. What younger generations find meaningful is seeing a difference, the impact of what they do. They don't give just to the Red Cross anymore just because. They don't give to United Way just because. They need that connection. How does this impact my community, the people that I see on the street, the people that where I can see my faith in action? They want to understand that connection. It's really, really important. And so when I'm talking about this, these are people in your church, right? These are people we have already. So we need to be able to answer these questions. How are we welcoming the younger generations into our congregation so they feel valued and a part of what we do? This is in response to what they're longing for. We have to have these conversations. Are we listening to the needs of those younger generations and responding? I'll tell you, one of the biggest things in the data is clear: music. Music is different for different generations, and I'm going to surprise you and tell you it is not hymns versus contemporary music. There are young folks who love hymns. It's not that. We're experiencing, Katie's all in. We are experiencing, but what we see is there is this feeling like, I have to like every song in our worship. We have to let that go. I don't like does anyone like every single hymn? I mean, that's impressive if you do. So lots of people are shaking their heads. That's good. When I go into worship, I know I'm going to like some of the songs, and some of them are not going to resonate with me, but I hope they resonate with other people. That's how we have to be thinking. It's not just what is my experience, what is our experience together? Are we managing our expectations of what younger people can give and how they can give it? Do you know what younger people don't have? Time. They also don't have money. The younger generations are more stretched than ever before. They really don't have that to give. So when they hear our expectations are they will give us time and money, those are the two things they might not have. So how else can they be a part of who we are? There are other ways we can give. We can give them time that kind of is short term, right? If you come this Sunday, you can be a part of this one thing we're doing. Give them ways to fit in. Don't use kind of a plug and play way that we do church. If plug and played work, my job would be so easy. It doesn't. What we were doing back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, it's changed over time. And I'll tell you, when we ran the data back in the 90s, because this existed, it was the same thing. It didn't change. So we have a rear windowing that's really neat, but it wasn't working great all the time. So we're got to be willing to adjust as we go. And what can we give each other in community that we can't get anywhere else? If you don't hear anything today, I want you to hear that. What can't you get anywhere else? What are we giving them? The other thing that has huge gaps is our church programming is often centered around seniors and young families, and there's a big gap in the 45 to 64 age group. So we come into church with our families and young people, then we age out of the kids programming. We might be empty nesters. Our kids might not want to hang out with us anymore. There might be all kinds of reasons, but we're not retired. And so, but where do we fit in the church life? So there's an opportunity there to build relationships in that demographic too. So we're going to end as we began today. This is coming back to the Golden Circle. The Golden Circle was specifically created by Simon Sinek because every organization could tell him what do we do, right? Every organization could tell him what products do we give, kind of how do we do it, all of those things. Some folks could tell him how, kind of how do we make them special or set it apart, what we do, but most organizations could not give him the why. It's very typical. What is the why? And the thing about being church is the why is baked into who we are. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each one should use whatever gifts he has received to serve one another. Our why is we're called to do it. Thank you.